What is going on, freaks and geeks? My name is John Solo, and this is Messed Up Murders, the super fun and lighthearted show where we explore some of the most vile and disgusting acts that humans have ever committed on their fellow humans. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, 2 months exactly, actually, and for that, I want to apologize. I'm pretty sure it's not good practice to start a new series, tell people to subscribe for more content like it, then proceed to post zero content like it for months, but I can assure you that it's not going to happen again. I was just busy these past few months working on other content. My buddy Drew was building a backlog of murder cases for us to cover in the future, and also Lauren and I took a trip out to Arizona to look for a place to live, because we're moving there. While we were out in the Grand Canyon State, we visited, you guessed it, Santa's workshop, and then we went to the Grand Canyon. And let me tell you, when you're looking at something as beautiful and truly incredible as the Grand Canyon, with its deep valleys, countless mesas, and layered cliff sides, you can't help but wonder, has anyone been killed here? At least that's what Lauren and I thought, so we looked it up, and it turns out, yeah, quite a few. There was one particular case that stuck out to us though, about a fella named Robert Spangler, a seemingly friendly and normal guy on the surface, but underneath that charismatic exterior was a sociopathic killer with a complete lack of any form of empathy. One journalist who covered his crimes even called it more heinous and cold-blooded than any she's ever covered, and you're about to see why. As always, make sure you hit that like button before we get started, as well as subscribe for new content like this on a regular basis, and I really mean that this time. And now let's dive into the messed up murders of Robert Spangler. So this nightmare begins at 10:45 a.m. on December 30th, 1978. 16-year-old Tim Trevithick visits his girlfriend Susan's house for what he expects to be a typical day full of making out with her bedroom door open. Only strangely enough, there is no answer after he knocks at the door or throws pebbles at her bedroom window. He decides to sneak into the house through an open window, something he's done many times before, and when he goes to his girlfriend's bedroom, he finds that she's still sleeping. He throws his gloves at her and tells her to wake up, but she doesn't react, and as he gets closer, he sees that both her clothes and bed sheets are covered in blood and that she has a bullet hole in her chest. Freaking out, he immediately runs to the bedroom of her older brother David, whom he was also friends with, and finds him with the same injury, barely clinging to life. Tim then calls the cops, who show up right away, and in the basement they discover a third horrifying scene. Nancy Spangler, the mother of the two victims, is sitting slumped over a typewriter with a revolver on the ground next to her and a bullet hole in her head. In that typewriter is a note from Nancy that reads as follows: "What do I say now that I've decided to do this? I found the gun some time ago and couldn't help thinking about this. I don't know why I didn't say anything. I feel shattered. We always argued about who'd have the kids. I will. I know you'll get along. You always have." Now, if you're confused by that weirdly worded note, then don't worry, the police were too, but it's all going to make sense by the end of this video. Now, a few hours after the cops arrive, Nancy's husband Robert comes home to discover his house is now a crime scene. You would think that he would be horrified by this discovery, but according to the police that informed him of the situation, he didn't have quite the reaction you would expect. And by that, I mean he didn't have any reaction. Despite claiming he was as shocked as anyone else that his wife could do such a thing, the police said he was oddly calm. Naturally, he had to be taken in for questioning. However, before we get into that, let me tell you a little about Bob and Nancy's relationship. They were your typical nuclear couple. They met while in high school when Nancy was a cheerleader and beauty pageant queen, while Bob was a football star. They got married not too long after graduating and had 2 kids, David and Susan. The folks in Littleton, Colorado, where they moved to after getting married, also thought highly of them both. They said Nancy was a kind, caring, stay-at-home mom, and Bob was a charming guy who was an excellent provider. So on the surface, everything seemed great, but as the saying goes, you don't find the dirt until you start digging. I don't know if that's actually a saying, but I thought it was catchy. As it turns out, Bob was having an affair with Sharon Cooper, a woman that he worked with at the American Waterworks company. We're not sure how she found out, but Nancy was aware of the situation and it caused quite a rift between them. Bob did not hide these troubles from the police when they were interviewing him either. He said that he knew his wife was still angry at him for it, but he never expected her to do something like this. Now, if you're curious about what Robert was up to while his wife was supposedly slaughtering their children, this is where things start to get, for lack of a better term, really funky, because his story changes multiple times. During his first interview with the police on the day of the incident, he said that he and Nancy got into an argument that morning and he went for a drive to cool off. He supposedly cruised around for a while, listening to a Broncos game, and decided to go see a movie, and when he got home, the police were already there. He also took a polygraph test to substantiate these claims, but apparently he was so uptight that the results came back inconclusive. I find that point very interesting because the police said that on the surface he appeared strangely calm, but I guess there was no way for them to know if he was just just distressed from the day's events or because he was afraid of getting caught. They ended up releasing Bob later that same day, but here's where the f***iness is kicked into high gear. The police continue investigating Robert, but burn out all their leads relatively quickly, and after just 6 days, the Arapahoe County coroner ruled the case a double murder-suicide and closed it on January 3rd, much to the disappointment of Nancy's family in the Littleton community. The big problem with this decision was that the police were still waiting on the results of the gunpowder residue test they had ordered for Nancy and Bob's hands, which took longer than 6 days to receive. When they finally did get the results back, they showed that Nancy didn't have any residue, but Bob did on his right hand. So despite the case being closed, the investigators called them in to ask him about it. This is when Bob's original story about coming home to find the police there changed in a big way. Now my guy was saying that he had gone home earlier, discovered Nancy's body in the basement, picked up the gun, then got spooked, dropped it, and ran away. Also, he went from saying the gun was his to it not being his. Totally believable, right? No way you'd call the cops immediately after finding your wife dead in the basement. I mean, why rush? She's not going anywhere. So at this point, the Littleton police were highly suspicious of Bob, but there was a problem. When the coroner closed the case, they returned all of the evidence they had except for the suicide note and could no longer pursue their leads. They even gave him back the gun, which is weird because he said it didn't belong to him, so I don't know why he'd take it. Robert also quickly cremated the bodies of his wife and kids so the investigators couldn't analyze them again. And then, and this part is truly insane, he went to his wife's funeral with Sharon Cooper, the woman he was cheating on her with. Like, make your motive more obvious, why don't ya? So I don't know if there is a right way to handle losing your entire family to a bloody, grisly murder, but if there is, Robert did the exact opposite of that. Because pretty much immediately after he was allowed back in his house, he invited Sharon to come live there with him, which, understandably, struck everyone as weird and creepy. Robert didn't seem to give a damn about any of that though, and when people asked him how he moved on so quickly, he just said that he was good at compartmentalizing things and blocking out the past. So despite the messed up circumstances, he and Sharon's relationship started really positive. He appreciated her bubbly personality that was so different than Nancy's, and they developed a strong bond over their love of hiking and the outdoors. The couple married 7 months later and shared a few happy years together, but after Robert's father passed away, Sharon told her friends that she was beginning to see a different, much scarier side of her husband. Unfortunately, we don't know too many details about what that scary behavior entailed, but we do know of one wild event where Sharon had a public meltdown out of fear that her husband was out to get her. She reportedly called up her therapist, Dr. Bell, told him that she was scared of Robert and may have expressed a desire to kill herself. Dr. Bell called the police, who found Sharon hiding in a storage room at a nearby grocery store, the manager of which said that Sharon had tried to convince him to give her his keys because her husband had taken hers so she wouldn't leave town. When the police tried helping Sharon, who was wearing a bag on her head in fear that she would be recognized, she wasn't the least bit compliant, even going so far as to try and kick the officer in the balls multiple times, so they had no choice but to arrest her. As expected, Sharon and Bob's relationship ended pretty soon after that. The two went through a divorce that resulted in Sharon getting most of their valued possessions, as well as hefty alimony payments that Bob was livid about having to give her. This wasn't the end of his romantic escapades though. After putting an ad in the Denver Personals, he met a woman named Donna Sundling, whose life he was going to change forever. As was typical for Robert Spangler, he and Donna's new relationship was a whirlwind of excitement. They fell for each other hard and fast, got married on August 18th, 1990, and settled in the little mountain town of Durango, Colorado. Being that both of them were personable, charismatic people, they became pretty well known in the community too. Donna had retired from her accounting job to teach aerobics at the local gym, and Bob coached Little League Soccer and had a part-time gig as a disc jockey for a country music station. I know, just when you think the dude can't get any more suspect, you find out he likes country music. If it were up to me, I'd lock him up just for that. What's even creepier than that though is that when asked about what happened to his previous family, he told a variety of stories. He said they were in a horrible car accident where he was the one driving and the only one to survive. He said his son was on drugs and went on a rampage killing his wife and daughter, or he told them the supposed truth that his wife had gone crazy and killed them all. Spangler was also able to turn his love of hiking into a part-time gig where he gave tours around the Grand Canyon, but this is where he and Donna started to grow apart in a similar fashion as he did with his other wives. You see, Donna had vertigo and was afraid of heights, and so steep drop-offs like you'll find at the Grand Canyon weren't really her thing. Unfortunately, due to their conflicting work schedules, her and Robert didn't really spend all that much time together anymore, and she was desperate to fix that. So when he asked her for the 100th time if she would go hiking with him, she finally gave in and said yes. What's particularly spooky about this is that Donna had a bad feeling about the canyon and called each of her children the morning before they left, and a couple of them said she had a weird tone in her voice as if she was saying goodbye. lie. A few days into their hiking trip, on the morning of April 11th, 1993, which was both Easter Sunday and the 4-year anniversary of their first date, Donna and Robert woke up, packed up their camp, and started out on the trail. Bob took Donna up a very steep path over a mine shaft along the red wall, one that she was no doubt terrified of, and gazed with her over the edge, admiring the view. It was this moment that Bob knew what he had to do. The relationship was on borrowed time, and if he learned anything from Sharon Cooper, it's that divorces were both messy and expensive. As Donna stood on the edge of the cliff, Bob quietly stepped towards her with his arms out in front of him. It's possible she thought he was going to adjust her pack or even embrace her, but instead Robert told Donna that she wasn't a good match for him and pushed her over the edge. She fell for 25 feet before tumbling over another drop-off of over 100 feet, and this time when she hit the ground, she was dead. Just imagine living your whole life afraid of heights, the Grand Canyon specifically, and that being the way you go out. Her last few seconds must have been a nightmare. Bob wasn't going to have a repeat incident of what happened with his son though, so he found a trail down to her that was slightly less steep, confirmed that she had no pulse, washed the blood and dirt off her face for some reason, then covered her body with a tarp. When he reported the incident to the park rangers, he told them a very different story than what happened though. He said that he was setting up his camera tripod to take a picture with Donna by the cliff's edge, and when he looked up, Donna had just disappeared. Similar to the police back in Littleton, the rangers also said that Robert had a strange calmness about him, informing them of the situation matter-of-factly and waiting in line behind other hikers before reporting it. When questioned about this, Bob said that he knew his wife was already dead, so there was no point in rushing. I mean, why rush? She's not going anywhere. Now, because there were no witnesses, and this happened back in the 90s when forensics weren't what they are today, investigators didn't have much to work with at the crime scene to prove that Donna's death was anything other than an accident. Combine that with the fact that 1993 was a uniquely terrible year at the canyon with 6 accidental deaths in total, more than the previous 3 years combined. So, once again, Robert got off scot-free. Just like with Nancy, he had Donna's body cremated before her family could even make it out to Colorado, and he gave a eulogy at her funeral that a friend described as tearless and weird. So at this point, Robert has gone through not 1, not 2, but 3 wives, and only one of them has made it out of their relationship alive. All that's about to change though when Sharon Cooper moves back in with Robert the year following Donna's death. So because Robert had been paying alimony to Sharon throughout the past several years, he still had a relationship with her, albeit a not so healthy one. Even still, when she got herself into more romantic and financial trouble than she could handle, she started renting a room from Bob. As far as we can tell, the former couple got along okay during their time living together, but about 4 months into their new domestic partnership, Robert came home to find Sharon unconscious with an empty bottle of alcohol and Tylenol. I swear, I didn't just pick this story because it involved Tylenol. I had my fill with the last episode. Robert took Sharon to the hospital where the doctors did everything they could to counteract the deadly cocktail, but sadly Sharon Cooper was pronounced dead on October 2nd, 1994. Now I know what everybody's thinking. Oh come on, you expect us to believe that after killing his past 2 wives, Sharon just up and killed herself of her own free will? And no, I don't. Here's the thing though, while at the hospital, Sharon did briefly wake up from her coma, and she told the doctors that she had taken the pills and alcohol herself. That doesn't mean Robert didn't have a hand in it though. See, he had been paying Sharon $5,000 a month for the past 4 years after their divorce and was more than ready to put those payments to an end. Given the depressed state that Sharon was in about her life and the unique situation of her continuing to rely on Bob for support, he had a certain amount of power and influence over her. Given his track record of being gifted with words and a cold-hearted son of a bitch, investigators had a feeling that he may have been the one who convinced her to end her life. Unfortunately, we never do get a definitive answer on that, but the suspicion around this situation was enough for investigators to reopen the previous 2 cases that Spangler was involved with. You'll be happy to hear that at this point, 15 years after the Spangler family was killed, investigators start connecting the dots between all of the suspicious details in these 3 cases and finding even more. For example, Nancy's suicide note. Why was the entire thing typed up and signed with only the letter N? Well, according to Robert, it was because Nancy had a neurological disorder that left her unable to hold a pen long enough to write a check. But during their search, investigators found several checks recently written by Nancy in full-on cursive, so there's no way that'd be the case. What was more likely was that he innocently told her to write the letter N on the paper and then typed up the note himself after she was dead. After doing some more tests, they also found it odd that Nancy committed suicide by shooting herself in the forehead from 6 inches away. Yeah, that wouldn't be my ideal method either. Several years later, in September of 2000, the police visit 67-year-old Spangler in Grand Junction, Colorado, and learn that he's married yet again. Dude just hated to be alone. They take him down to the station and ask him some questions about the aforementioned discoveries, but Bob doesn't give them anything that they can work with. Weird Weirdly enough though, when one of the detectives gave Robert his card and said they'd like to speak with him again, his response was, "Yeah, I know you do, egotistical prick." Well, interestingly, the next day, Robert does call up the detective saying he wants to talk, and this time before he comes into the office, they use the tips they received from the FBI profiler to their advantage. They classified Robert as an egocentric control freak who loved being the center of attention, and so they made him feel real special. They staged the office to exaggerate the intensity of the investigation as if they had a task force just for the case itself, and told him that he was a very important killer whom they could learn a lot from if he would just talk about how he planned out these homicides. Then, after a 4-hour interview, when one detective says, "We want to learn about the 5 murders you committed," Robert turned to him and responded, "You're giving me credit for 1 too many. There's 4. And as creepy as that is to say, they now had their confession. But to solidify it, they had to hear Robert break down the murders in detail, which he did with a blank expression on his face. First, he brought Nancy into the basement, claiming there was a surprise for her, sat her down, and had her close her eyes, then he pulled out his revolver and shot her in the head. Next, he went upstairs and shot his daughter in the chest while she was sleeping, and his son David actually woke up after hearing this. When Robert opened David's bedroom door, he was sitting upright in bed, and Robert shot him but didn't kill him. He was going to shoot him a second time, but he felt that this was a little too barbaric for Nancy's character, so instead he held a pillow over his face and smothered him. And as for Donna, at first Robert didn't want to admit this one because he was afraid of her adult children coming after his assets, but get this. The police told him that if he wanted to be considered a serial killer, which he did, then he'd have to have killed more than just his family. Robert was quiet for a while after hearing this, then said, "Well, I guess you've got your cereal." Then he went on to break down what he believed was a genius plan to eliminate Donna from his life, which we've already talked about. When asked why he would do such horrible things, he told the police, "I guess I'm selfish." He didn't want to deal with the divorces, alimony payments, and maintaining relationships with the kids he really didn't like all that much, so he killed them. Not only that, when it came to his first family, he let Nancy's family and the Littleton community believe for 22 years that she had just gone insane and killed her children. So f***ed up. He received his sentence of life in prison without parole in 2001, and witnesses stated that while on the stand, this freak was smiling, winking at his 4th wife, who had no idea she was married to such a monster, and didn't even look at the victims' families. Unfortunately, this time we don't have the satisfaction of knowing Spangler rotted in prison because he died of a brain tumor only 9 months after being convicted. As annoying as that is though, if Spangler wasn't going to die soon, he may have waited even longer to admit to his crimes, so it may have worked out better this way. And if it's any consolation, when he made the request to have his ashes scattered in the Grand Canyon, the Arizona judge shut him down real fast. And while this guy may have believed he was really something special and a one-of-a-kind killer, we have the reassurance of knowing his entire community and anyone who hears his story knows the truth, that he's just a psychopath who got lucky. If he tried committing those crimes today with more technology available to do the required testing, there's almost no doubt that he would be caught. Well, Solo fam, those were the messed up murders of Robert Spangler. Got any thoughts you'd like to share with the class? You've already heard most of mine, so let me know yours in the comments down below. On that note, we're going to wrap this video up though, so make sure you hit that like button if you haven't already, subscribe for new messed up murders on a regular basis, and share this episode with any true crime fans you know. I've got links to my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram down below. As much as I hate plugging those, I would really love it if you gave me a follow. That way I can keep you updated on messed up news and what content you can expect. And as always, follow my son Gunther's Instagram because despite his terrifying appearance, he's actually not a killer. I'll be seeing you guys next week with an episode of Mythology Explained that I am really excited for, so make sure you check in for that. Until that day comes though, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.